Hey guys, welcome back. Better Than a Let's Play episode 40, MoonQuest edition. I'm Enigmaus. We're back on the moon. The monsters are relentless. We're picking up exactly where we left off at the end of the last episode, only now we're building, so that means time lapse. You can see the tree that we grew is almost gone, decayed after we harvested all of the wood to make our book stand. Now we're excavating. We're giving ourselves a nice flat floor in the basement, and then we will continue to build up for our moon facility, which I decided isn't going to be super big or super complicated. It's going to be more of a test ground for the different systems that we'll be able to use, because apparently Mars is a little less forgiving than the moon is, which the skeletons are going to have 3 bows. Is that what it's going to be? I don't know. So there's a limited number of things that I want to do on the moon, and I want to build a facility that allows us to do that with some conveniences, but not so large and complicated that it takes us forever to build, and then we only use it for like a couple hours and we abandon it when we go to Mars. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, what's going on in the back of my mind. The first is testing the oxygen setups. We obviously want to get ourselves set up with the oxygen compressors here, like we talked about in the overworld, so that we can recharge our oxygen tanks without having to go back to the overworld to do it. We also want to mess around with the oxygen bubbles that you can build inside, or create inside structures, so that the interior of your structures are basically oxygenated and you can walk around in them as though they were in the overworld, which is kind of nice. If you're refilling your tanks, you're swapping your tanks around, not to have to worry about doing it quickly so that you don't die, because that's you don't really get any warning that your tanks are low. You just get a warning that your tanks are empty, and then you have to hurry and get new tanks in place or you die. That's just the way the moon works. So that's one thing, getting the oxygen bubble, test it with the airlocks and all the other things that make it work. Then we want to do the exploding cow factory, which we talked about. We've got our cow spawners. We're going to have cows spawning on the moon. They're going to suffocate and die because they don't have oxygen tanks on their backs, unlike the spiders. And we're going to gather up all their drops so we have an abundant supply of beef and leather from now till the end of time. And then we're going to hit up the dungeon here and try and get ourselves the schematic for the Tier 2 rocket that'll take us to Mars. And that's basically all we're going to be doing on the moon. So you can see here, this camera angle makes this facility look larger than it really is. In reality, the top of this structure is just barely peeking over the crater that we started building it in. It's not a very large structure. I built the framework out of basalt pavers and anti-pavers, just like we did the airship docking arm in the overworld out of the marble pavers and anti-pavers, using the connected textures between the two to add a little bit of visual interest. That's basically the same concept here, only it's black instead of white. And then filling it all in with moonstone, which is the hardest material available on the moon, and just allows me to use up all the moonstone that I get from excavating for various different things. So that's nothing particularly complicated. That top level now, where you see those sections of the wall still open, that'll all be filled in with glass, because it's high enough that it allows you to look out and see the surface of the moon, the landscape and all that other stuff. And now you can see I'm messing around in that corner down in the basement, digging out where we're going to put our water supply for our oxygen production center, if you want to call it that. Just like we discussed in the overworld, we did the test setup. I'm using aqueous accumulators from thermal expansion, which is not in the basic MoonQuest pack, but we also discussed how you can do it with Buildcraft pumps. It's basically the same thing. Infinite water supply being piped into electrolytic separators that take the water and convert it to oxygen and hydrogen. We send the oxygen to an oxygen compressor to refill our air tanks. We send the hydrogen to hydrogen generators that produce power that run the entire system, so it becomes self-sustaining once we use a battery to get it jumped and up and running for the initial sort of push. And then it just goes. It goes and it does its thing. And we can at least change our oxygen tanks around on the moon. We don't have to go back to the overworld to do it. Now these extra black blocks are the explosion-resistant blocks that we made out of all of that steel, because we wanted to have something that would give us a measure of protection against meteor strikes on the top of our facility. Now, I thought about it, understanding what I do about the explosion mechanics in Minecraft, whether it's a creeper or a nuke or TNT or meteors. In this case, I was originally going to put the explosion-resistant blocks on top, and then I thought these things are too expensive to be soaking the brunt of a meteor strike because I don't want to have to replace them if they get destroyed. What I would rather do is have them as the last line that absorb the last little bit of the explosion. And the easiest way to set that up is to do like I've done here. We build a layer with the explosion-resistant blocks, and then we come back and we build another layer 2 blocks above. So there's an empty layer of air, and then there's a layer of what will be moonstone on top. That moonstone will absorb the brunt of the explosion from any meteors that happen to land precisely on the roof of our structure. And then the explosion-resistant blocks will make sure that there's no part of the explosion that is actually allowed to puncture the structure itself. So once we've got our oxygen bubble set up, it's safe. We don't have to worry about finding out that it doesn't work anymore because there's a hole in the roof and we're about to die because our oxygen tanks are empty. It's one of those things, if you don't account for it, it's going to happen. And if you do account for it, it won't happen. That's just the way it works. You can see I ran out of moonstone. That's why there's a square that's empty in the middle. All the monsters started attacking. All I really wanted to do was excavate a little bit more to get some more moonstone, but the monsters, they weren't having any of it. It was one of those things, and then I ran out of oxygen. I had to run inside, get some more oxygen, punch a door in the facility so that I could go in, get some oxygen, find out that we weren't properly lit inside, and that's why there's a spider jumping around. Jump ahead in time. After we finished the roof, we got enough moonstone to fill in the square within a half hour. This happened. A meteor landed on our roof. Now you can see some very important details here. First of all, I responded to it. I heard it and I was like, wait a second, well, that sounded really close. I came up here and I found it. You'll notice there aren't a lot of bits of moonstone floating on the ground for us to retrieve. There's one piece down there. The rest of it was destroyed. You also see there was quite a large section of blocks that were destroyed by the explosion from the meteor's impact, but none of them punched through the explosion-resistant blocks. So I built it thinking probably never going to need it, but within half an hour it proved its worth. It might be a little bit of overkill, and I don't care, because it's better than not having that functionality in place and realizing later on that you needed it. So I was glad I remembered to start recording to show you that little repair job that we ended up having to do so soon after finishing the roof. Now this, which you already saw a brief glimpse of the finished version that I'm building now, despite the continuing onslaught of monsters, is the Exploding Cow Factory Amphitheater. That's what I'm calling it, the Exploding Cow Factory Amphitheater. Very simply, I freely acknowledge that the whole idea of this factory came from a Yogscast episode on the moon where they set up something similar to what we'll be doing, only with pigs. And they found that spawning pigs on the moon, the pigs would suffocate and die because they don't have oxygen tanks on their back like the spiders do. This meant spectacular pork explosions with pork chops flying all over the moon landscape. But in my mind, it could be refined a little bit more by containing the explosions so that you still see them. You still see these bits flying all over the place, but then they're neatly gathered and contained and stored so that you can make use of them without having to constantly run around and pick them up or risk having them despawn. So the first thing that we have to do is build this Exploding Cow Amphitheater for water. What we're going to be doing is, you can see, starting to see now, we've got blocks in the corners, and then it starts to step down and continually down to the middle where we're going to have some hoppers that'll gather it. And then we put a water source block in the top block in each corner, and it'll flow down and basically cover the entire floor with flowing water that's all going in the direction of the center of the square so that the hoppers can gather up the bits and pieces without having to have tons and tons of hoppers all over the place that may or may not still pick up everything. So it's a little bit of economy in terms of how many hoppers we need, and also it adds a little bit of interest when you've got this floor that's multi-dimensional and water flowing and all that other stuff. Lots of excavating. This was quite the undertaking. I didn't really expect that it was going to take this long just to get this set up and in place. but it did. And then we're going to have glass walls. It's extending up as far as I can go based on the glass that I have, and thanks to that excavator that I made with the heat thing, the auto smelt, we have access to a lot of glass. So we're going to set that up, and then we're going to put a roof similar to the one that we've already got on the other structure in place to protect it from the meteors, because I do not want to be losing cow spawners to meteors that land on them, explode, and destroy the spawners. That would suck. That would really suck a lot. So we're going to be a little bit careful about that. And then we're going to set up the spawners. We're going to let the cows suffocate, the poor bastards, and watch their bits fly into the walls and then sink down and go into the hoppers down at the bottom. That's going to be the exploding cow factory. And we're actually going to set that up. We're going to get it completely finished in the next episode. So if you want to be notified when that episode is added, easiest way to do that is you can subscribe to my channel. That's one way. Another way is follow me on Twitter. You'll get a notification there, and Google Plus Enigmius1. Please leave your comments and feedback below. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and take care.